Good morning to everyone, ladies and gentlemen, dear fellows, you all. My name is Francisco Delgado. I am professor of this house, and for me, as professor of this house, and above all, as a colleague, old colleague and friend of Juani and Pablo, is a big pleasure and a big honor to be part of this meeting and have the chance to introduce next speakers. Inclusive education in the age of artificial intelligence is a fascinating and relevant topic. As points of greatest interest, I would like to remark that artificial intelligence can help to create accessible educational materials for students with disabilities. For example, speech recognition and text-to-speech tools that can assist students with visual and hearing difficulties. Artificial intelligence can analyze students' progress and adapt educational content on their individual needs, which is especially useful for students with different learning styles. Artificial intelligence can help the teachers to identify the specific needs of each student, allowing them to offer more personalized and effective support. The learning platforms powered with artificial intelligence can provide additional resources, such as interactive exercises and virtual tutoring that can be adapted for students with different needs. Artificial intelligence can also facilitate social inclusion for promoting collaboration and communication between students of different backgrounds and abilities, creating a more inclusive environment. So, there is no doubt that we are facing a very interesting issue for we all as teachers and people concerned about the future of education. In addition, artificial intelligence has a great potential to correct inequalities in education. This will be the topic for the first speaker, Dr. Angelo Paletta from the University of Bologna. He will explain us how it can positively influence educational policy in different ways, and why the implementation of these technologies must be accompanied with policies to ensure equity and ethics in their use. But I say it is not up to me, but to Dr. Paletta, and I want to introduce him very briefly, since he is very well known to all of you. He is full professor of Business Administration and Accounting, director of the Department of Management at the University of Bologna in Italy. As a researcher, he has studied management in education, corporate governance, and internal controls, governance and accountability in universities, and the managerial challenges brought by the circular economy and sustainable development. He is co-director of the Master in Public Management and Innovation and Bologna Studies at Bologna Studies School, member of the Scientific Council of the Master in Leadership and Strategic Management of Schools at the University of Bologna. This is a very brief and summarized curricula. So I think I have spoke too much, and now you have the floor, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to be here at the University of Castilla-La Mancha. Congratulations for these universities. It's similar to Bologna because we in Bologna we have a multi-campus similar to like Castilla-La Mancha, but unfortunately we have the same experience in the last month for the flooding. So many disasters for people and property. My speech is about inequalities in education. The title is very ambitious in a few minutes to address so complex issues, questions. But I tried to give the context for analyze the implication of the AI and more general digital transformation for inequalities, equity, and inclusion education, because of course AI digital transformation have many potential for address the improvement of the schooling in terms of efficiency, for example, in terms of time, reduction of time to prepare evaluation or classes. But we know that we have many challenges associated with the introducing of AI digital transformation, privacy, security, but also socio-emotional implications of AI digital transformation, algorithm biases, and finally is very important, the problem of the training of the teachers, the preparedness of the teacher to these new challenges. My first analysis is about the concept of equality, equity, and inclusion, because many concepts are used in education to denote equity and inclusion, but these concepts are not always used consistently. Equality stresses the role of providing the same opportunities to all students, equalizing resources provided to support them. Equity of opportunity, in particular, is understood to mean that everyone should have the same opportunity to thrive, regardless of variations in circumstances in which they are born. Having been granted such opportunities, considered their innate abilities, or whether, students' outcome will still depend on how much effort they put in. This concept holds individuals accountable as they are considered responsible for to have control over their effort. This implies that the differences in outcomes that arise from differences in effort are fair, while those that derive for personal characteristics, such as socioeconomic background or gender, are not fair. A focus on educational equality may not be enough to fully address student diversity. Indeed, an exclusive focus on equality could lead to narrow isolationist policies practice without fully addressing inclusion. For example, having all students achieving a minimum level of performance and meeting educational goals that are established without considering the diversity of their experience can promote equity but not inclusion. According to OECD, we can define equity as equitable education systems are those that assure the achievement of educational potential regardless of personal social circumstances, including factors such as gender, ethnic origin, indigenous backgrounds, immigrant status, sexual orientation, gender identity, special education needs, and giftedness. Inclusion, on the other part, is an ongoing process aimed at offering quality education for all while respecting diversity and the different needs and abilities, characteristics, and the learning expectations of the students and communities, eliminating all forms of barriers, discriminations, celebrate diversity, promote participation, to overcome barriers to learning and participation for all people. All personal differences are acknowledged and respected. Inclusion can also be conceptualized as historical development of different models of education. Researchers generally categorizes, for example, educational system in 4 categories: exclusion, segregation, integration, and inclusion. More and more, inclusion fosters students' well-being as a critical element to ensure their full participation in education through developing their self-worthy sense of belonging to schools and community. Well-being is generally not as much of an explicit focus on equity. In a few years, we have witnessed a perfect storm that has exacerbated the problems of equity and inclusion in society in general and education worldwide. COVID-19 was an educational emergency, but unfortunately not the only one. Governments and education policymakers are increasingly concerned with equity and inclusion education due to several major global developments such as demographic shifts, digitalization, migration and refugees crisis, rising inequalities and climate change. These developments have contributed to increasing diversity and warrant an examination of its impact on equity and inclusion education. Of course, since 2000, there has been great progress in achieving universal primary education. In 2015, 91% of children in developing countries were in school. The number of children out of the school worldwide has dropped by almost half. More girls are in school than ever before, and literacy rates have risen. These are great achievements. Some developing regions have made little progress because of poverty, war, and emergencies. There are more children out of school in Western Asia and North Africa because of ongoing armed conflict. There is a worrying trend. While Sub-Saharan Africa made the greatest progress in primary school enrollment, large disparities remain. Children from the poorest households are up to four times more likely to be out of the school than those from the richest households. Disparities between rural and urban areas also remain high. When we try to speak about equity and inclusion in education, we need to try the correct measure indicators to understand to gather empirical evidence on this phenomenon. From my perspective, that is an economic perspective, generally we use 4 different indicators to understand, empirically, to understand the implication on equity and inclusion: learning exclusion, learning poverty, learning fairness, learning inequality. I try to address each of these aspects. Learning exclusion. One way to capture students' participation is by measuring the out-of-school rate, which is defined as the percentage of children in the official age range for a given level of education who are not enrolled in school. Countries are ranked in this presentation in the descending order of the out-of-school rate in 2022. Out-of-school rate at upper secondary education have fallen for most OECD countries from an average of 80% in 2013 to 7% in 2022. But there are some exceptions, for example, Bulgaria and Romania. In 2022, the out-of-school rate at upper secondary is above 30% in India and Mexico, despite having fallen in both countries since 2013. Considering the size of these countries' populations, particularly India, these correspond to a considerable fraction of number of students who are not of school globally. A second indicator to measure learning exclusion is the number of NEET in a country. This presentation is at the European level. In 2023, 11.2% of young people in the European Union were neither in employment nor in education training. The proportion of NEET in 2023 ranged from, is very different in European context, ranged from 4.8% in the Netherlands to about 20% in Romania. Spain performed better in this ranking than Italy, and similar to France, placing between 10 and 15%. Learning poverty is another way to measure equity and inclusion. Learning poverty is a predictive indicator of the number of needs within a country. Learning poverty is measured through the share of students who finish school in conditions of strong scholastic fragility, represented by students who in all subjects observed, in this case is the case of Italy, so is Italian, math, English, reading and speaking, achieve a very high goal for far from those expected after 13 years of school. This is interesting because learning poverty is predictive of dropout. It is an implicit dropout rate that is very significant at the end of a cycle of study, for example, secondary and high school. Learning fairness analysis answers the question, are there significant disparities in proficiency related to students' socioeconomic status? In this case, we analyze the disparities in math, that is the achievement from a statistical point of view that give indication in variances, disparities. Here we see the differences in math in a comparative perspective between OECD countries. Even in the most equitable countries, the most disadvantaged secondary students do not perform as well as their more advantaged peers. Countries like Brazil and Peru have the widest gap in the share of students of high and low socioeconomic status achieving at least PISA level 2 in math, based on the index of economic, social, and cultural status. Estonia and Japan are the only countries where the differences between the top and the bottom quartile is less than 20%. I focused Spain in this case because the situation is similar in some aspect to Italy. For example, in Spain, the proportion of children from the children of the bottom quartile of the PISA SCS index achieving at least PISA level 2 in math is 40% lower than of children from the top ESGS quartile. In the case of gender, there is not difference. There is a parity index very similar for girls and boys, but the proportion of immigrants achieving level 2 in math is 20% lower than that of non-immigrants. Learning inequality. Learning inequality measures the differences in learning opportunities available to students based on the school and the class they attend. We can see that a school system ensures maximum equality when the variability in pupil outcomes is only minimally dependent on the type of the school or class within schools attended by students. In the relevant literature on these topics, this indicator, the variance explained by school class, is considered to be within the acceptable range when it remains below 15%, hopefully taking even lower values. The graph shows the different school grades in Italy in the first cycle of education. It also shows the impact of school class performance or results. This is, for me, is very significant, this data, because, for example, in 8th grade, in the South and Highlands in Italy, the school attended and the class within the same school explain more than 50% of the variation in math. Differences between classes within schools explain a quarter of the overall variance. From economic, sociological, political point of view, this, but also, of course, legal point of view, this put a question of school governance, school autonomy, and the use of school autonomy inside the school. Surveys of the OHD's countries study systematically the level of autonomy in OHD countries. In this representation, we get to see the governance of schools with reference to who has decision-making power over staffing, financial resources, student admission policies, assessment, and curriculum policies. Normally, these aspects are very different in different countries in OSD. We can correlate the governance of school with performance. To understand the correlation between governance, in this case, science performance. The results presented in this figure show that students in school systems where principals and, to some extent, teachers have greater autonomy in managing their schools score higher in science. This is particularly true when principals or teachers have a greater responsibility for the curriculum, but less so when they have a greater say in admitting students to the school. Students score lower in science in those systems where school governing boards have a greater responsibility for school admission policy, and also when national education authorities hold greater responsibilities for areas, especially for the curriculum. No correlation is observed between the responsibility held by local, regional education authority and performance in sciences. But interesting, when we try to understand the main correlation between school governance and not quality but equity, we have different results. More school autonomy may not always be effective. For instance, figure shows that more autonomy for schools, principals, and teachers is not positively associated with equity in science performance. In fact, results in science are more equitable, meaning there is a weaker association between student socioeconomic status and their performance in science, when education authorities have greater responsibility for disciplinary policies. Centralization is more effective in some aspect for equity in respect to quality. So there is a trade-off in a policy between quality and equity and how to design governance for equity and quality. Interesting, this is toward my conclusion, educational leadership makes a difference for quality and equity. In this case, very complex, because we have many aspects to analyze, but in synthesis, to summarize, the data in this table demonstrate that student learning is higher when the educational leadership of school leaders is above average, both in centralized and decentralized systems. So, school governance and leadership play a crucial role in a transition, including the transition toward equity and inclusion to address the challenges of AI and digital transformation. Of course, legal aspects are central to address aspects as vision and strategy. Who take vision and strategy about the introduction of AI and digital transformation in school? Who is the level in a multi-level governance more effective to take decisions about this? We know, for example, in many countries in OECD, we have training of teachers related to the university experience. School don't have the capacity to invest in the professional development of a teacher. For example, in Italy, schools don't have autonomy to invest in professional development. It's a choice of the single teacher, not of the school. This, from a managerial point of view, is a contradiction. Because the capacity to acquire the learning, the professional development to address the challenges also of AI and digital transformation require a contextualization of the problem in the specific vital real world that is each single school in each possible situation. So we need to address aspects as support for creativity and change, overcoming resistance to change. This is typical in educational system. We have many barriers to overcome. For example, not only the training of the teacher, but also the capacity of parents to work together school to address the same problem. What we see in the day-to-day experience of the school is a conflict, a systematic conflict between parents, head teacher, and authorities. This is a problem because governance needs to create more cohesion in the system, to give information, communication, to address a common shared vision between different actors. And the only capacity that we have to create change is to sharing the efforts and the commitment towards a common objective. Thank you for your attention.
Well, preparing this meeting, we made sure that there will be time for debate, time for reflection, critical comments. And definitely we have to be sure that that will be guaranteed perhaps after each lecture. So I guess, Klaus, if you don't mind, that we will now room some time for questions, because it's still fresh, still, yeah. If you have to refer to within not half of an hour, that is better that we can raise comments now. I will start a fire. Critical comments. May I have three, well, I have several of them, but I will limit my question to three issues. First, on finance. We know that you are the expert on management, finance, and in education. So, on finance in education, what was at the summit in Brazil a couple of months ago, UN. But may I be concrete on 4 levels: international, national, school level, and with the family. On just the budget to finance. I will formulate it in the form of a question. If a country definitely is not fulfilling its human rights duties on education, as I mentioned, there is in some countries, there is no progress on fulfillment of education rights, but there is regress. In some countries I visited, salaries of teachers are not paid by the government, although education is the core obligation of the state. What should the international community, what can the international community do? For instance, from World Bank, IMF, or regional, is there any room for interventions? Second level is at national level. Taking into account the disparities, Italy, for instance, it's huge. Has this any financial consequences? Third level, in many school laws, there is a positive discrimination vis-à-vis schools who are concentrating to, let's say, students or families with less, let's say, wealthy economic status, or where the diploma of the mother is inexisting, no diploma, or the mother is not teaching or is not speaking the national language. So there are several parameters. What about making the difference in school finance from the governmental perspective to reach equity and equality and inclusion through financial matters? So should we promote less healthy schools more with public funds, or is that not the best option? And last, should families be penalized, be sanctioned when their kids are not going to school? So that's on the debate in several countries, the kind of a contract when your child is not going to school, the family can be financially sanctioned by the government. Or by, yeah. So there are four financial issues. Can you rapidly focus on those, and then I will leave my other questions for later.
Thank you. Yeah, your question requires another presentation, but I try to synthesize some answers. Of course, finance resources are relevant, are based to overcome disparities, but is not the solution from an economic point of view. For example, this is true at different levels. For example, in the past 3 years, as a consequence of the Next Generation EU, European policy, in Italy we have a big program with many years inside the public administration, of course, health system, but also many in education, in universities and schools. Of course, we have many resources, but these not create change. In this moment, we don't observe improvement. Of course, we need time to understand the implication, because when we put resources, we need to attend the long-term perspective to understand the implication. But more resources is important, but is not sufficient to resolve the problem, because it requires good institutions, a good organization at the different level. How to use resources is important as how many resources we put in the system. For example, the governance, the leadership, the rules are very important, because if we give more resources in educational system, but we don't change the organization or the evaluation or the incentives for people, this not create change, create more bureaucratic administrative task. This is the case, for example, in Italy in this moment. More money mean more bureaucratic process, but not create change, because policy not change the capacity, the condition that determines a different allocation of resources. Of course, this is true for developed countries, but the situation is different for developing countries, where the amount of resources is a precondition to create change. But normally, when we give more resources in education, generally we have a fragmented structure of a governance education, where we have power at the central level, ministry level, at the regional level, at the local authorities level, at the school level. So we have different plays of decision making. We have different contexts that use resources, but who have the responsibility for the use of resources. So we have a multidimensional decision-making approach, but we don't have a single point of reference to give a responsibility that is accountable for the choice, for the decision-making. So more resources mean more fragmentation is not the solution. I think institution rules as very important to accompany new policy in given resources at different level, as you said.
Comments, Maria? A mic? Can we have a mobile mic? Yes, voila. We know. We knew already for decades.
Thank you very much. Professor Paletta, you have convinced us with all the empirical evidence that you have provided that indeed school governance and leadership plays a crucial role in the change that we are trying to achieve. And in this case, you were talking about the problem of equity and inclusion. So, I mean, I'm convinced that the change happens more or less at the local level, especially with your last comment on finance. But I also share Jan's disappointment with the role of law, education law. But my call would be not more law, but more implementation. So what, in your view, is the role of education legislation? To grant more autonomy to decision-making at the local level or institutional level, or something else? Because you have proven that it works at the institutional level. So what is the role of law in making this change happen?
Thank you for your very interesting question. I think this is an aspect where economic, legal, political discipline converge to the same objective. For example, I think a school autonomy. In this moment, in many countries, including Spain, Italy, many OECD countries, we have school autonomy based principally on curriculum, didactic aspect, a teacher with many power to design, make, doing, to evaluate, so in a very, very auto-referentially context, no? in many cases. So schools don't have autonomy on address teachers to improve learning, but this depends by the decision of the teachers, the spontaneism of the single people in school. This is a problem. When change is related to the single individuals, to the spontaneism, is imprevisible. The system don't have capacity to replicate, to create scalability of the practice. At the same time, we have a school with many with teachers that decide on curriculum, but each teacher not decide on people and not on finance. But change requires coherence between resources, process, and objective. In this moment, this is a domain of different actors. This is a problem. I think, of course, depend on the practice, but at the base there is the coherence of the legal design of the system. So I think I agree with you.
Yeah, there are still so many other issues we should talk on, but during coffee break we can focus on some of them. Like I was a little bit surprised on the correlation you made between school governance and performances. We had with Ela in Salzburg meeting on school autonomy and on impact on inclusion and quality. The OECD figures you made were on 2015, so it can be a little bit outdated. I was one of the founding fathers of education at a glance, so we need that kind of comparative data. But we should perhaps have a ELA symposium on consequences of governance, local governance, and also embedded in the law. Not more legislation, definitely not. But if there is an absence of law, you have a problem. And of course, it's all about implementation, stupid. So that, on school governance, we should have indeed for... Okay, thank you so much. How to introduce Klaus Beiter? You need hours. I will not try to go into his psychology. Fascinating guy, South African and German, with a huge interest to national and international framework. The author of the opus magnum on the right to education in international law. You should have his thick book, how many, 700 pages or whatever. Yeah, but what comes after is even more impressive. Just two anecdotes. Well, I should have said tenured professor at Northwest University, so yeah, quite close. Two anecdotes. In one of our last meetings, Alexander mentioned or raised the question, Klaus, how are you doing this massive volume of highly qualitative research output? Are you still sleeping, or what is your secret? And then the second anecdote, in a quite interesting online meeting we had in South Africa last year, Klaus interviewed a good friend of mine, some of you do know, Justice Sachs, one of the icons of South Africa, on the Constitutional Court judges, a victim of apartheid, and one of the co-authors of the Constitution. And Klaus interviewed Justice Sachs. And when I was with him in his house in Cape Town, he raised, well, that was a quite interesting guy, that Klaus Beiter. We should follow him also as an academic in the future. So he was so positive, and that was indeed a very powerful moment indeed. Klaus, you opened now a quite interesting list of publications on liberalism, on international issues dealing with right to education. You have the courage to speak. What is the duty of an academic and of a university, also Catholic university, the power and the courage to speak, even in issues unpopular vis-à-vis the public opinion. Well, that's now a foundational declaration of the Pope on the role of the Catholic University. So the courage, you have the courage to speak and to write. You have the floor.
Thank you, Jan, who is my mentor. I describe him as my mentor. Since I lost my notes in the train yesterday, I had to rewrite or kind of prepare it anew. So that's why you see so many devices here with a phone. But we should manage. The topic was given to me by Pablo, so my role is to spoil the game a bit, talking about educational technology. Let's get started. So, this is a quote, and you may guess who said it. I'm not convinced that recent ideas about replacing humans by technological devices will ever materialize, nor that they would be beneficial if they do materialize. Basically saying a teacher makes all the difference. The absence of a teacher prevents schooling from taking place. And for teenagers in OECD countries who have replaced socializing by surfing the web, I've not seen a single piece of evidence claiming benefits for their social skills, tolerance, or even basic literacy. Maybe Maria knows it. It was the first special rapporteur on the right to education in one of her reports. Jan would say there's a problem with this photo because she doesn't have a cigarette in her hand. She was a chain smoker. But she was a skeptic of the use of educational technology. Of course, it was at the beginning of the century. Things may have changed since then. But we also have the vanguards of edutech. OECD saying in 2016, digital technologies do have huge potential to transform teaching and learning practices in school, and the edtech sector should develop products and devices that drive innovation in schools. And you may remember the talk that we had by Andreas Schleicher, Head of Education at the conference in Bologna. So he is basically the evangelist of edtech, not the shouting one, more the hypnotist, perhaps. You will remember his speech. And then a quote here from Sebastian Truhn, co-founder of Udacity, saying, companies are better positioned to see where the jobs of tomorrow will be and prepare people for them than universities. Of course, I'm not just speaking about universities, I'm speaking about the whole education system, but it's the tenor that perhaps the educational technology industry can do things better than public education. The question, of course, is if that is true. And as Neil Postman said, Neil Postman, I don't know if you remember who he is, American cultural critic, one of his books called Technopoly, The Surrender of Culture to Technology of 1992, saying that a wise man must begin his critique of technology by acknowledging its successes. So, of course, I think he there refers to the fact that it has actually had an effect, of course, but also think of how our lives in education have changed. Think of assistive technology for the disabled. We will have a speak by Juanita tomorrow, I think. And think of communication technology now that we can have ELA meetings online, for example. Or if I think back of the time when I wrote my PhD thesis at the beginning of the 2000s on the right to education, and I had to physically go through each single report by the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. Now a machine does this for you. So the whole topic of text and data mining technology, which has changed and will change research. For example, COVID vaccines were found through the use of text and data mining. So there is a potential in technology and potentially also in educational technology. But as I said, I will spoil the game a bit. So edtech is inherently good, is it? Now, this is a photo taken in 1927. What you can see here is a class happening in an airplane cabin, the teacher standing at the front showing a globe, children sitting there, and this this photo was basically published in a book by Larry Cuban, the book called Teachers and Machines, the Classroom Use of Technology Since 1920, wishing to indicate the problematic relationship with technology in education and kind of the suggestion that the mere fact that there is technology makes education better. So you're looking at this picture, we think, wow, this is good education. It takes place in an airplane, but what is the added value? So that is the message behind this, basically. So when we speak about technology, it's always about technological progress. So there is like the insinuation that technology that develops further automatically is kind of a progress. And we live, as Morgan Anderson has called it in a book, Public Education in the Digital Age, Neoliberalism and EdTech, Uncritical Technophilia. And if you think about the use of technology, just think of the use of GPS that we use to reorientate ourselves. Remember, GPS is the device that we use to see, okay, this is the street we should take. Maps is a time of saying this is the street we should have taken because you went past. But anyway, the use of GPS has been held in studies to diminish our capacity to perform the cognitive work of mental mapping, which is an essential aspect of problem solving. So technology always has its downsizes, elements that we must take into account. If you think of a smart board that is used in school, what is its advantage above the whiteboard? What is its advantage above the chalkboard? Not really much, just that it is much more expensive and that somebody can make a huge profit by selling the product. And these days, of course, the smarter the board gets, the more information it can accumulate about what is happening in schools to kind of regulate what should happen in schools, how technology, how policy should be formulated. But it's the age of technophilia, and as David Noble lamented, the ideology of technological progress takes no prisoners. In this cultural context, any and all critics are at once disarmed and marginalized, dismissed as ignorant cranks, Luddites and lunatics who dare stand in the way of inevitable progress. So I think it is about questioning the use of technology. What is its value really in education? I think that's also what some of the reports of the Special Rapporteur actually say. So if Andreas Schleicher is the evangelist of EdTech, his opponent is perhaps Manfred Spitzer, a German neurologist. We should take what he says seriously. He's got an age index of 81. And his book, Digital Dementia, what we and our children are doing to our minds. So some things that he says in his book. Those who spend a lot of time using audiovisual media in early childhood have already affected the brain development in a negative way. The praised multitasking actually is an attention deficit disorder. The excessive use of digital media causes obesity, stress, and sleep disorders. And there is no evidence that information technology would improve teaching. In contrast, it leads to superficiality. As I said, he's a respected academic. Of course, he's got very clear opinions also. But we should take this seriously. I don't know if you know about the Stavanger Declaration concerning the future of reading of 2018. Stavanger is a beautiful city in Norway. It is based on a meta-study, a scientifically done study, which shows that readers are more likely to be overconfident about their comprehension abilities when reading digitally, leading to more skimming and less concentration on reading matter. A meta-study of 54 studies with more than 170,000 participants shows that comprehension of long-form informational texts is stronger when reading on paper than on screens. This has to do with what we call the hermeneutic circle in education, basically meaning that every bit is understood with regard to the whole, and the whole is understood with regard to every detail again. That is something that is much better achieved when you have a physical book in your hand, and that may be the reason why some educational systems, like Sweden, is going back to actual books. So, things we should think about. Now, if we speak about proof for the effectiveness of digital technology, I don't know if you know UNESCO's 2023 Global Education Monitoring Report on EdTech, and one of the essential findings there is little robust evidence on digital technology having an added value in education. The only evidence that comes at the moment is from those wishing to sell it. And those studies that have been done, about 90% of them have not been done in a scientific matter. There has not been peer review. There have not been clinical control groups. So there is simply really scant evidence on its beneficial use in education. On the other hand, it is of course always said by those advancing EdTech in education, like the OECD, for example, that and here we can go back to the Global Education Industry Conference of 2015, where Andreas Schleicher basically said that educational technology will bring about a disruption in education. It is disruptive education in a positive sense, and associating this radical break with the education system with liberation and power democratization, and an opening up and basically an overcoming of bureaucratic, hierarchic, and innovation hostile public education systems. On the other hand, similarly, apart from this concept of disruptive education, is the concept of reimagined education. So during the COVID pandemic, Microsoft released a paper called Education Reimagined. The fallout from COVID, continuing advances in digital technology and intensifying pent-up demand for student-centered learning have combined to present an unprecedented opportunity to transform education across whole systems. And of course, I think Microsoft would be one of those companies that would benefit quite a bit from that, financially speaking. There's also an interesting report that came out at the end of last year, also issued by UNESCO, but written by Mark West, with the title, An EdTech Tragedy, ? And in that it is said that instead of the education system having become disrupted in a positive sense through COVID, the evidence overwhelmingly points in the opposite direction. Education became less accessible, less effective, and less engaging when it pivoted away from physical schools and teachers and towards technology exclusively. Many learners and teachers found the digital education services offered to schools and families during the pandemic constraining and overly rote. I don't know if you know the book Failure to Disrupt, Why Technology Alone Can't Transform Education by Justin Reich, and there he cites a few myths about, or mentions a few myths about educational technology. One saying technology, the first myth is that technology can disrupt systems of inequality, because it says technology is always implemented in systems as you find them, unequal systems as you find them, and they procreate that inequality. Second myth, free and open technologies will democratize education. The evidence is also that those that benefit most from educational technology are those that are well off, that are better placed. Third myth, digital divides can be closed by expanding access to technology, because technology cannot close those inequality gaps which exist, because the reasons for those gaps are different ones. They are cultural ones, they are social ones, they are very different ones. Now, of course, we live in the age of AI and the age of AI bots, and in future we will have AI tutors that assist our students, so there's actually no need for any human to help the student anymore. I found this, one of my LLM students, Carl Sneyman, wrote on AI and copyright, and he had this interesting thing. When AI is asked to show what Barbies in different countries should look like. The first one is the German Barbie, so obviously this is based on the accumulated knowledge we have. The German Barbie is wearing an SS uniform, so this is very typically German. The Qatar Barbie is wearing a male headscarf, and the South Sudanese Barbie is holding a gun in her hand. So there's an interesting quote I read somewhere, and I don't know who said it, also Googling didn't help me. It said, the big difference between humans and computers is that computers don't give a shit. And that is what we always need to remember. Our human faults are built into these systems without an option to correct them for those that are subject to those machines. Okay, there's lots of information on this slide. Technology, what lies behind technophilia is the cult of efficiency. And this is actually quite old. So it is not really a product of neoliberalism. It is, again, coming up. But it goes back to what we call Taylorism in the US, basically in the 1910s to 1930s was the age of immigration to the US. And schools were struggling to provide education to all, and one of the solutions was to be found in making schools like factories, basing them on scientific methods and business methods. So, you know, schools, this is information I found on an interesting blog on the internet by Gary Clabeau, who's a professor of education in La Salle University, who says basically you've got three kinds of schools. You've got the school as a temple. So that is the school that transmits cultural values, the traditional school. Then you have the school as the town hall. It's where there is a democratic and critical debate and inclusion of diverse groups. And then you've got the school as a factory. And that is something we had already, like as we see, a long time ago. And he says that we are coming back to that age under neoliberalism, basically. And he refers to a description of how education must happen, for example, in public schools in Camden, New Jersey, in the US. So he says professional educators are being provided with scanned scripted curricular units that even go so far as to tell teachers what to say and what to write on the board in virtually every lesson. We see the same with the bridge schools that were ordered to close in some countries using the, what was it called, the computer that they had in class which told the teacher what to say. But it is a tradition basically being revived, going back to that time, just now supported by technology. So that is a thing to keep in mind. And I don't know if you know the book, The McDonaldization of Society by Ritzer of 1992. And that's the idea that society should perhaps be organized in the same way that the McDonald's chain, based on the values of control, efficiency, calculability, and predictability. If you apply this to schools and technology in education, control, for example, through hierarchy. Schools don't really have a choice as to which technology they want to acquire. Teachers and students don't really have a choice as to what technology they want to acquire. The choices are pre-taken, and they are often taken by technological companies. Private companies are making decisions with little government oversight, actually government being happy that somebody is doing the job, which has been called extra state crafting by the author Easterling, basically saying governments are happy if they can delegate these tasks to somebody outside of government. It's the idea, of course, of the neoliberal, deregulated small state. Efficiency with the introduction of adaptive learning, personalized learning that we have in schools, with virtually everything what the student is doing is being observed by cameras, by clicks, by movements, with systems registering that, collecting data, and ultimately aimed at eliminating the risk of education, the risk of the student failing. And this also means, in connection with the next topic, calculability, making sure that you can calculate what comes out of the education system. And behind this is the idea, of course, of the PISA tests, focusing on those elements of education that you can quantify. Success is measured in terms of criteria that can be quantified. Quality, as such, is an irrelevant criterion in this regard. And we see how the discussion about whether SDG 4 has been achieved is actually now a discussion about how countries do in PISA tests. So that is one of the crucial criteria used to measure how successful education today is. So that's a clear example of how this is being implemented. And predictability, you want always to have a product that is the same, basically meaning the student coming onto the market. Technology can also assure that, and it also means the implementation of standardized solutions. Technology always means standardized solutions for everybody. And another stream underlying philosophy is a philosophy of positivism, which goes back to Auguste Comte in the 19th century, saying that everything that can be known is either facts or rational conclusions from sensory perceptions, meaning there is no validity in interpretations or context because they are subject. The only truths are those that I mentioned, and that is a scientific knowledge that we should have, and on those facts we should base our education. And proceeding from that, basically, this is how then also pedagogy has changed. I referred to the book of Anderson already before. In the neoliberal positive paradigm of education, the understanding of knowledge has been shifted to value-neutral units of facts that can be delivered from teachers to students. If knowledge is framed as value-free, it can be measured and controlled. When knowledge is no longer understood as socially constructed, the idea of knowledge as a site of political and social contestation is rendered unintelligible. And technology becomes the mechanism through which we undermine human influence. Basically, technology becomes the means through which we eliminate risk in education. It's the sense of the cult of efficiency. We want to have an assurance that what comes out of this system is what we want. And what we want is people that are effective in the capitalist labor market. Going further, this is Kenneth Saltman. Of course, the solutions we are offered by the technological industry is produced by them. And here he says, corporate curriculum will make narratives, histories, and perspectives that affirm rather than contest elite power. Corporations will favor knowledge that represents the interests and perspectives of economic, political, and cultural elites. Because the companies will promote an education that ultimately will recreate society as it is. I don't know if you're familiar with Paulo Freire's work, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, where he says that education essentially is dialogue through which you learn to contest existing power structures and can work towards an equal society. So that is what education, in his view, is about. It's a dialogue. The dialogue is essentially eliminated in education relying on edtech. Another point, I've taken this from a report from Education International, where they say big tech platforms place and keep users within a single environment with only a small number of standardized forms of expression and interaction on offer. This promotes uniformity and conformity. And the last slide, when we look on a critical pedagogy, it's a philosophy I find very appealing, which I found by Gert Biester. He's written a book, The Beautiful Risk of Education. So as I said, the cult of efficiency tries to eliminate the risk of failure in education, but where he says that risk is essentially what makes up education. He says, education is about establishing opportunities for dialogue with what or who is other. It's about ways of relating. This makes the educational way the slow way, the difficult way, the frustrating way, and so we might say the weak one, as the outcome of this process can neither be guaranteed nor secured. If we take the risk out of education, there's a real chance that we take out education altogether. So he speaks about education being about qualification on the one hand, but about also what he calls subjectification, making the learner, the student, a subject. This happens through dialogue, by interacting with others, by being questioned by others, by having to relate to others. And that is something that technology can hardly teach you. And for that reason, at the moment, the way we use technology is to do what Biester actually calls, it's not education, it's learnification. You focus on those skills and knowledge bits that you can convey, but you take away the dialogue that also in Paulo Freire's philosophy is necessary to challenge the status quo of society. If I'm going over time, please stop me. The next slide on the surveillance of teachers, an interesting chapter written by, amongst Stephen Luce, who's also going to write for our research handbook on the right to education, Jan. Surveillance of teachers. Teachers these days are being deemed risky subjects. And in high-stakes accountability, technology-driven regimes, you can basically, what he says here, where these teachers are discursively positioned as potential impediments to future student performance and national economic prosperity, and in need of policy interventions that might mitigate such risk. So the teacher's body serves as a site of inspectoral gaze. The teacher is compelled to perform as a particular kind of teacher who sees metrics, competition, and data-driven dispositions as characteristics of good teaching. The classroom is no longer the unique professional domain of the teacher, but it rather is the fishbowl that exposes them to constant observation and auditing. So it's interesting, there was a decision by the European Court of Human Rights a few years ago holding that the use of surveillance cameras in amphitheaters was an intrusion on privacy. Nowadays, this technology that we increasingly find implemented is doing exactly that. It's a process of collecting data on every possible aspect, and that data being accessible to schools themselves, to those in positions nationally, and ultimately to the people perhaps at the OECD where they can measure outcomes. So this is a bit of a dystopian vision, but that's, as I said, that's my role today. This is the way we know the education system, right? This is how it used to be always, but is it true still? Because now we've got somebody entering the picture. It's a global education industry, which essentially means education becomes a private good. The question is, who are these stakeholders in the education industry? Who are the actors in the education industry? International organizations, OECD, World Bank. I remember the statement by Katarina Tomaszewski who said education policy today is made by the rich OECD countries who want to sell education and a bank, the World Bank basically. International coalitions, the Global Partnership for Education, International Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity. These are big structures that are beyond any democratic control. We've got somebody writing a chapter for that for our research handbook as well. Intermediaries, philanthropists, the Varkey Foundation. I don't know if you've heard of them. The Varkey Foundation has more convening power than UNESCO today to get education ministers together than UNESCO. Renowned individuals, we've mentioned Andreas Schleicher, James Tooley, wealthy amateurs, Silicon Valley's foremost entrepreneurs, for example, of course, Bill Gates. So on coming here at the airport, I saw a book entitled The Bill Gates Problem. And it is developing a counter-narrative of the very humane billionaire who's helping advance the world, but saying that is, and there's one chapter in it on education, which I couldn't read, but I will buy the book. The power of Bill Gates in education, a power that is not subject to any democratic control, and essentially advancing the products that the company is ultimately selling. EdTech market makers. These are, for example, venture capital funds. Maybe I can jump a bit forward. I found this article very fascinating here by Janja Komjenovic, a friend and colleague of mine, about venture capital funds and how they work. Those are funds that basically invest in educational technology. And the people that give the money is here the wealthy donors, limited partners. And the idea of these capital funds is to make a return on investment of 20 to 30% for shareholders, which is really a lot. And they do this in the way that these edtech companies must be scaled up within 1 or 2 years of funding. There must be a 10 times return on the capital of the startup over 5 years. So it means like pushing these companies to the top through massive injection of funding. And they do this, for example, by the people working in the funds getting 2 to 3% of the fund's total capital, the people in the fund sitting on the boards of the edtech companies that are ultimately selling the products to schools or to universities, and through those people working in those funds adopting a very clear social good narrative, meaning appearing on the media, sponsoring competitions and awards, global summits of stakeholders, close relations with those in politics. So which means that these investors have become active political actors in the education sector, beyond any form of control, selling the product. So obviously we must ask ourselves, the products that we increasingly see being offered, are they really in the interest of education, or are they in the interest of those that want to have a big return on their money in a short period of time? Who else belongs to the global education industry? Then, of course, there is the big tech companies. Amazon, for example, is providing the basic structural network that is being used in any school today. Yes, and so we can go on. And interestingly, obviously there's the edtech companies themselves, and what is very become very the thing of the future is personalized learning, adaptive learning, where the machine constantly surveils, observes, collects data. We call that datification, and on that basis can tailor what the student should learn, change the program for learning. We have e-advising, easily detecting a student who's a risky student because the machine sees that the student is more in the gym than perhaps in the library. Somebody coming in, we might say it's promoting success because learning outcomes do become better, but what are the ethical questions behind this? What does this do to autonomy? Is education not also about making that autonomous choice? We said the risk of education, is that not what makes persons ultimately human? Yes, so that is what we see happening in education, and the state, amongst others, in this conception is becoming one provider among many. So the state is not in control anymore. The state has outsourced many of its functions, and education institutions perform as themselves in the market. Okay, so time is basically running out. Let's see what I should still say. You see, there's a lot of information here. Maybe, okay, coming to the solutions. Okay, I don't want to say too much on that because I suppose Maria is going to say a lot of that. But I think maybe two things that I took out of the reports, which I think are very important. There was a report on digitization by the former, actually by Kishore Singh in 2016 on digitization, saying that education should not be a substitute. So digital technology should not be a substitute for face-to-face education. Human contact is essential to the teaching and learning process. And we've got a similar statement in the report on COVID. What I liked here is a statement, if the teacher is not present anymore, it would affect the heart and purpose of the right to education, because education is more than learning outcomes. Education is a social act carried out by a community of learners who require real and human interaction. But then also something mentioned in the last report, which I find crucial. And I think that might be the big problem. So it's a suggestion that free and public digital platforms and infrastructure for education be provided. And I think this is a bit of an illusion. Now, I'm also a teacher of IP law at my university. And what has changed in the digital environment is the way copyright works. Because with the sale of physical books, the library becomes the owner of the book. It can do with the book what it wants. It can be copied, it can be reused, subject to certain limitations, of course. In the digital era, when you buy a book, you never become the owner of the book. You only become a lessee of the book. So terms and conditions are prescribed. And if the company decides after 2 years your book will expire, then that's it. It could happen, then you've got nothing left. And it is a perpetual obligation to provide. So that's why there is also a great interest in selling digital books, because it creates an obligation to pay, with a never-ending point in sight. The problem I see is the recommendation of having free and public digital platforms. I think the present structures that we have in place by the big tech companies are so deeply ingrained, meanwhile, that it is virtually impossible to get away from them. So it would be necessary, but on the one hand, can that be achieved? And then saying it should go to the government. The government is not a developer of technology. How should this happen? I'm not saying it's impossible, but how should this happen? Those are, well, maybe just also to please Jan, I had a nice quote to end my talk with, and I think I should just locate this. Joseph Ratzinger, so obviously not the present Pope, the previous Pope, he said, "The machines that man has constructed now impose their own law on him. He must be made readable for the computer, and this can be achieved only when he is translated into numbers." Thank you.
Thank you. Your mission is fulfilled. Quite instructive, inspirational, provocative. Those ELA meetings are also learning moments. We learn that much from each other. But also we are, of course, provoked to raise issues, raise questions. We have a short time to raise a few issues. Maria?
How did you know?
I know. I know you, so.
Very quick. Actually, on your last point, Klaus, on your last point, yes, it's tricky. The recommendation for government to develop free online resources, it's utopian. I don't believe it's ever possible. How can a government just start developing something which Google, Amazon, and OpenAI have been developing for years with all the resources that they have? It's utopian. But at the same time, we have, while in preparation for the AI report, we have researched a few examples from India, for example, on community-based AI projects for education, which is owned by the community and powered by students and teachers. So yes, of course, the magnitude of such projects is, of course, not comparable with Google and OpenAI, but at least it treats teachers and students as co-authors of technology which they use, and also the data is not taken away from the owners of the data. Still is. So, I mean, there are, what I want to say is that it doesn't have to be proprietary and commercial. Yeah. There are options. They are very, very small scale.
Yeah. Where I see the problem is with the interoperability of systems. So if, ultimately people want to connect it to the normal computer that they have, which is a Microsoft computer, to other networks that are being used. The national government may use certain data infrastructure to collect data which is also provided by private companies. So it is a major effort. So it is really a major effort. Yeah.